guys, it's Brittany from the Different on Purpose podcast, and I am joined by Jenna Ryan.
Hi, everybody. Good morning. Good morning. If you are watching the YouTube, if I look tired, it's probably because I am. It's currently 7:41 a.m. I think that's the earliest we've ever done a podcast, but I'm excited to do it anyway. It's going to be a really good topic today.
To be talking about kids, having kids, not having kids, and so there are going to be some trigger warnings. Some of those trigger warnings are going to include things like mental health, sexual assault, suicide, abortion, pregnancy loss. So if any of those things are going to be things that will trigger you or bother you, it's probably best for you to skip this episode. We hope that you join us, but if not, we look forward to having you listen next week. Today's topic, we're going to be talking about kids. There's lots of joy in having kids. There's also some sadness in trying to have kids, not being able to have kids. So we kind of want to touch on a lot of that. So let's get started. I was interested in something. It piqued my interest because I came across something on Instagram first. So I started digging a little bit into it, and I came across a study excuse me, that was conducted in 2021, so not too long ago, by the USDA. It stated that the average cost to raise a child from birth to age 18 was $233,000.
Holy shit.
That's so much money.
Hold on, I'm about to do that per year. 233,000 divided by 18. That's almost $13,000 a year.
Yeah. And I mean, it did talk about how like there are some, I think ages like 7 to 8 or 7 to 9 were like the most expensive years. And then I think it spikes again in like those teenage years a little bit. Cause like obviously like you might buy them a car or you might whatever, but this was just ages 0 to 18, no college included, like no college tuition. So if you send your kids to college and pay for it, then obviously that's even more money. If you pay for their like housing and all of that as well, like even more money. And I was just like, man, you don't think about like when you're like, oh, I'm just going to have a baby. Like you don't think about, oh, I'm basically buying a house, like full price,
Yeah. Wow. I don't think I realized that. Honestly, my answers might be a little different through this podcast after learning that. That's so much money.
Yeah. Well, then, so the Instagram post that I came across first, it was a post by Personal Finance Club. So I'm not exactly 100% sure on how like accurate I guess it could be, but it piqued my interest, so I wanted to mention it. But it stated that the current cost to raise a child to age 18, so I guess in 2023 or maybe end of 2022, was $310,000. So the post also indicated that since 1990, childcare inflation has increased 4 times faster than the overall inflation rate. And that makes sense because literally everybody that I know that's like a working parent complains about the cost of childcare. The cost of childcare is ridiculous. It makes it hard for both parents to work sometimes because they can't afford it, especially if you have more than one kid in childcare at a time. So Colby and I were like, I want to say like lucky enough, but our kids kind of like altered in being in daycare. So by the time we had Declan, Everly was like at the very end, like about to go into like pre-K kindergarten. So for us, it's just kind of been like we have two kids, but we've only had to pay for one child at a time for daycare, which granted, we've by the time Declan's done, we're going to have been paying for daycare for the last like 10 years, which is crazy because it's like almost 5 years for a child to be in daycare because they start kindergarten, when they're around 5. But the price depends really. I was having this conversation with somebody at work the other day. Price really depends. It depends on how much childcare you need, because I know a lot of daycares will offer like part-time where you can do like 3 days a week. So if you if you work somewhere where it has like a hybrid schedule, and you only have 3 days in office, then that might be an option for you. It's a little bit cheaper. They have a lot of preschools, not usually for like infants, I don't think, but like usually when they're like toddler age, they have like these a lot of churches will offer like a preschool, but they're typically only like half days. So then you have to get your kids at 12, which I think is more complicated because I'm like, how, like, and I guess unless you have like a grandparent or somebody who can pick them up every day. So they offer a lot of those, and I know those are cheaper as well. But if you need like full-time daycare, like 5 days a week, like most daycare's hours, I want to say, are from like 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. So, your hours at work may vary, and they may not be there full 12 hours a day, but
So not only is it expensive, but sometimes it's not even convenient. Like if you have, like, say, because a lot of the times, like I'm working till 6 p.m.
they do have some daycares. Like I remember when I was growing up, it's the only one I've honestly ever known of. But when I was growing up, my parents worked, my mom and my grandmother both worked at the hospital there in town. And so that little daycare that was right across the street in Covington, I don't remember what it's called. And but it's a 24-hour daycare. And it's I know that a lot of the hospital staff utilizes that. I guess like if they work night shift at the hospital. But I remember at one point that I was there, and I was there into nighttime. And I remember like we would be laying, it's kind of the same routine. Instead of laying down for nap time, we lay down for like bedtime. And so I remember that. And then like we would get woken up at like, 11, 12 o'clock at night, whatever, and go home. So I guess it's nice if your parents need it. But yeah, I think that other things that go into childcare are like obviously where you live. Like here in Georgia, I feel like it's probably one of the more decently priced areas. If you're like in California, I cannot imagine how much like daycare cost. So yeah, like location plays a huge part, and even within the state, like location plays a huge part. So like where we have Declan right now, like it's kind of out of our way now that we've moved to like a different county, but we work in the county that he goes to daycare in. So like it's still a little bit out of our way, but for the cost of daycare in the county that we currently live in, one, it's hard to find openings. Like, they're typically waiting lists, but if we could find an opening, like the price is like twice as much. And I'm like, I would rather just spend a little bit extra like money on gas and time to just keep him where he's at, because it's not the amount of inconvenience that it is to keep him there is not $200 extra, a month. Like, I'm not spending $200 a month in gas to take it, an extra 15 minutes up the road. So
I just looked at the average childcare costs in Colorado Springs, and I don't know how it compares to Georgia, but they said it can be anywhere between $15.64 an hour to $24 an hour. Is that about average, you think?
well, here we do it. Let me see. Yeah, here we do it by week. So we pay like a weekly cost. So let me see. So let's just say, let's go on the lower end, $15 an hour. Typically, let's say you work 40 hours a week. So your kid's going to be there at least 40 hours. That's $600 a month. That's about how much it is here. I think we pay about $600 a month. So yeah, somewhere like $900 a month is a little ridiculous, but there are places here that are more like private daycares, and they cost way more money. They probably cost more than $900 a month, but it just depends. And it depends on the age of the child too. That was another thing that affects it. So like when they start as an infant, that's typically the most expensive room. So sometimes it can be here we do it by week. So that's the only thing I really know. So like sometimes it would be like $250 a week for them to be in like the infant room. And then as they then they would move to like the 1-year-old room, and then it may go to like 230, and then they'll move to like the 2-year-old room. It may go to like 220, and then so yeah, we pay around like $600 a month, and we have like probably like a year and a half left of it until Declan will start like in the school system. So we'll see, because then we're still going back and forth on by the time we get done building, like wherever we're going to be at that point, and what the school systems are going to be like there. I don't know. I don't know if we'll put the kids in public school or switch them over to like a private school setting. So we may not ever get done paying for school. Who knows?
Wow. Lot to think about. These are the things that these are the things, I mean, like I think about them, but now that I'm like kind of wanting kids, I'm like, wow, this is something I need to definitely consider. It's not just like, oh, I want a baby, let's have it. It's like, this is actually going to cost a lot of money.
I mean, it's easy to think about when you think about being a first-time parent, you can't really think about it because you don't really know. I mean, you may know like if you have friends who have had kids, but you don't really know from experience, so it's a little bit different. But like that's one of the things that Colby and I talk about is like how expensive just babies alone are, because you have like clothes. Babies grow so fast, so like they literally you can buy like 100 6-month like outfits, but then by the time they wear like 4 of them, then they're in like 12-month clothes, and you're like, what do I do with all these other clothes that I bought? And then you have to buy new clothes. So babies grow super fast. So like clothes, and then if you can't breastfeed, then you have formula, and formula is so expensive. They just eat a lot. Babies just, you don't think that they do. They eat a lot. But you also have to think like if we were sustained on like milk alone, we would be hungry way more frequently. So I don't think it's like super filling for them. So they just eat like every 2 hours. And so formula is expensive, and then you have like passies and bottles and burp cloths and diapers and wipes, and there's a lot of those. And then like, I don't know, just random things like medicine, because babies, they don't have an immune system, so they get sick all the time. So, medicines, and then like, the freaking, whether you do like the bulb syringe or the sucky thing, like you always gotta clean them out. Sometimes if you have constipated babies, then you gotta do like little enemas basically to like help them poop. I don't know. Like it's just, there's so many things that you just don't know until you experience it. And then like when you after you've had your first, when you start considering having like more kids, then like those are all the things that go through my mind every single time people ask us. I'm like, babies are so expensive. So like when I meet people that have like 5, 6, 7, 10, 12 kids, I'm like, I have no idea.
Oh God, I can't even imagine.
Well, I guess I know, like back in the day, like when people would have so many kids, A, the wife was typically staying at home, so there was no childcare costs. B, they had like a ton of like homemade stuff, I guess. Like I don't really feel like medicines and stuff were a huge thing. Like I feel like it was more like home remedies and whatever. And then also I know a lot of older school people, even when I had kids, would be like, why don't you just use like cloth diapers? And like, because that's disgusting. Sometimes the blowouts that babies have.
The blowouts. Blowouts.
Yes, every time my babies would have like a blowout where it goes, like, you had Everly once when this happened. I remember.
Oh, I remember.
Yeah, it went all the way up the back. All the way up the back. And Ashton called me and she's like, what do we do with our clothes? I'm like, throw them away. I don't want them. Throw them away. I don't care what outfit it was. I don't care. Just throw it away.
I remember that specific moment, like honestly being like, I don't know if I could ever do this, because there's like, and it wasn't like it was nasty. It was just like, one, I felt bad for Everly. I was like, girl, you got shit all over you. I feel so bad.
She was like, what do we do? Just stick her in the bath. That's the only option.
And she had it like in her little crevices. Like you had to like really get in there and clean. I'm like, I feel like I just want to like dip you in some sanitizer, and make sure you're all good.
Um, okay, so speaking about you having kids, when we were in college, I think it was when we were in college. I remember you mentioning to me a few times and to other people, just overhearing your conversations, that you didn't know if you were ever going to have kids. Part of that, I think, is like you were just very focused on like your career, while you were going to college. So, can you talk a little bit about why you had that mindset?
Yeah. So it was a little bit of, there's like a few different reasons why. I'll kind of just like start from the beginning. So I didn't always have the mindset that I wasn't going to have kids. Like, I think just as being a girl in general, like, we get baby dolls, we get all of these things when we're children. So it's just kind of like an inherent want to be a mom, you know what I mean? So like growing up, I was like, yeah, I'm gonna have kids, I'm gonna be a mom. That's just like sort of the natural progression of things. And then in high school, well, it wasn't even in high school, it was in middle school too. So when I started my period, they were incredibly painful. And to the point where I was like hurled over, throwing up. It was just bad. If you've had severe period cramps, or if you've had cyst erupts, if you have like endometriosis, anything that causes you, even if it's just regular period pain, you understand how excruciating it can be. And it was happening to me every single month. And it was just awful. And then the more I started to progress, like in puberty and stuff in high school, what I began to notice was, so you know how when women have periods, like it cycles. So like one egg will release 1 month and then one egg will release the next month. It goes back and forth.
Yeah, like your ovaries alternate.
Yeah, your ovaries will alternate. So what I was noticing is every other month they were worse than the one before, like significantly worse. Like 1 month it would be like just regular period pain. It was uncomfortable, like I was able to manage it. And the next month would be excruciating. I couldn't go to school, I couldn't go to work, I could barely walk, and it would just like kind of hit out of nowhere. So finally, I told my mom, hey, I think I need to go to the hospital. Like, something is not normal. I'm in a lot of pain. And not that my mom didn't care, but she would just brush it off as me being dramatic about it. And she would just like sit me in a bathtub and let me sort of just like rest it off. And it got to the point where like I'd gone to the ER a few times and they'd given me pain meds, and pain meds wouldn't touch it. So finally, there was one day where, and this specific day, it was a cyst about the size of like a cherry, by the size of a cherry, that ruptured. And I remember like it was the Georgia championship something or whatever. And my mom was so pissed. She had to take me to the ER, and they did scans, they did everything. And they were like, yeah, she's missing half of her uterus. We need to probably like look into this a little bit more. So that's when they found out that I have something called a unicornuate uterus, which is, it's kind of similar to a bicornuate uterus. I feel like bicornuate uteruses are more well known. Bicornuate is when your uterus is basically split in two. You still have all your parts and everything, but your uterus is just split in two. So technically, you could get pregnant in each individual uterus at the same time.
Somebody was telling me about that like a couple weeks ago. I feel like somebody was telling me that they knew somebody like that, and I was like, that's insane. I would be really nervous. I have anxiety about getting pregnant all the time anyway. I feel like if I had the chance of like getting pregnant twice at once, like I'd yeah, could not imagine.
Yeah. And you know what's crazy too is there's stories where, so like I said, like the your ovaries will alternate. So there's been stories where people will get pregnant 1 month in one uterus and then they get pregnant the next month in the other. So it's not twins, like it's very far from twins. They're just pregnant with two babies at the same time. Usually, like, it's sad because usually like you can't carry both. Like I've seen stories where like it's hard because it's only half the uterus, so like there has to be room for one to stretch out. I mean, it has happened, but um, really difficult. So, cornuate uterus is basically the exact opposite of that. So I have only one side of my uterus, and I only had like one communicating horn, is what they called it. So I still had both my fallopian tubes, both of my ovaries, but my uterus only connected to one fallopian tube and one ovary. But the fallopian tube that wasn't connected to the uterus. Like, it was still a full functioning fallopian tube. My ovaries were still full functioning. So when it was that side's turn to ovulate, I was still processing everything, but it didn't have a uterus to go through, basically. So it was building up and getting stuck in the cervix, and that's what was causing the pain. So all of these cysts would build up and they would rupture, and it was super, super painful. So I ended up getting surgery on that. They removed the fallopian tube from that side. I can still use those eggs. They left my ovaries, but one side does not have a fallopian tube at all. So I don't ever have problems. I still have periods every month. I honestly have no idea how that works because it doesn't have a uterus to float through. So it's interesting to me, but I still have a period every single month. But so when I found that out, after they did the surgeries and everything, during this process, I was a sophomore in high school. Or no, I was like a junior, senior in high school, I think. And doctors had told me, like, it is incredibly difficult for people like this to get pregnant. It is a super, super rare birth defect. Luckily, I still had both my kidneys. A lot of the times, people with unicornate uteruses don't have both their kidneys. So, one, I was very lucky to have both, and not just one. But they had told me that it was going to be really, really difficult for me to get pregnant, and they said it could be very dangerous for me to get pregnant too. So that was one thing that kind of made it clear in my mind. I was like, okay, like, it's going to be difficult for me to get pregnant. I mourned it at the time. I think I was really upset about it. And after that, I was kind of like, okay, I think I would be fine with not, if it's not in my life's plan to be a mom, maybe having this birth defect is what contributed to that, So I was okay with it at the time. And then also I was super, super focused on making something out of myself because I wanted so badly to just get out of the situation, like generationally, that my family had been in for so long. So I wanted to go to college. I wanted to make something of myself. And I tried to stay very focused on that. And kids were something that I saw as kind of like a block to that. Like, I was almost kind of like cynical about it in a way. I think I would joke and be like I never want kids because, like, I don't know. I think I just had a more cynical response to it. So, yeah, I don't know if that makes sense.
Well, so looking at it now, I know you said that, like, you mourned it, you were okay with it at that point, but that's a very young age to try to conceptually grasp never being able to have kids because you're not really at a point where you even want them yet. So I guess my question is, do you think that you actually came to terms with, like, being okay that you couldn't have them, or do you think that you just convinced yourself that you were okay with it and then kind of like threw yourself into focusing on your career because you didn't either know how or want to mentally deal with the emotional roller coaster of either not being able to have kids or, like, going down the path of trying and then being disappointed if you couldn't? I guess, does that make sense?
Definitely the latter. Yeah, no, that makes sense. Definitely the latter. I think that mentally it was really hard for me because I was really upset when doctors told me that. Even being like 17, 18 years old, I was upset about it. So I think I just had a mental block. I was kind of like, okay, I've just got to shut this out. Like, I can't have kids, and, it's going to be hard for me too. So let me just, like, convince myself that I don't want them because I genuinely did. And like I said, up until that point, I wanted kids. Like, I thought myself as, like, being a mom someday. And the reason I know that I was trying to, like, push that down, specifically after the medical stuff, I think in college I genuinely didn't want kids. Like, that was kind of like a genuine thing that I thought about myself. But, like, after finding out about the medical issues, I was definitely, like, pushing it down a lot. And I think it's just because I was like, oh, well, this is something that's never going to happen for me. So let me just, like, not deal with it, or, like, I don't know. So I definitely pushed it down a lot and tried to convince myself. And maybe genuinely in college I did want kids, and that just kind of carried over. I don't know, but yeah, I was very, like, and up until, like, and it wasn't even college. Like, it was up until like a year ago that I was like, oh yeah, I'm never having kids, never. And I was, like, fully convinced that I never wanted them, never wanted to be a mom, that I would be completely fine without having children, all the way up until last year. So, yeah.
Okay, do you think that okay, I'll save that question because I want to dig into that more. But before we move past you not wanting kids, did you receive a lot of judgment or criticism from not just your family but just other girls around you? And I guess like my the reason I'm asking is because even though you were in college or even as early as high school and nobody, none of your peers were probably at an age where they were even considering having kids, do you feel like you still received judgment from them because you made the decision or you were speaking about the decision to not have them yourself?
I think, like, I don't, for my family, it was outwardly judgmental. It was like, what do you mean you don't want to be a mom?
Yeah, I think that's normal. Yeah, I think that's normal because your parents want grandkids and this and that. So I feel like it's expected if you make that decision. I mean, I'm not saying that it's right. I feel like, it's your body and they should, respect whatever decision you make about your own body. But I feel like as a society, I feel like when you make a hard decision, sometimes you expect certain backlash from your family or people that are close to you that are then also going to be affected by your decision. But I'm more curious about like your peers, people who wouldn't have been affected by your decision to not have kids. Did you receive judgment from them even though they were also at a point where they themselves were not trying to have kids?
I think so. So, in the way, there was always a common response when I would talk about this with peers, be like, "Are you sure? Like, really?" That was kind of the response. And not that it was like mean. They weren't, I don't think anybody was ever being mean. They were just genuinely confused. And like, they would ask why, like, what do you mean? And then I was always met with the response of, I think you'd be a wonderful mother, but why? You would be such a good mom and all of these things. And I remember thinking when people would say that, be like, okay, thanks. Like, that's a compliment. But like, why can't I just be a wonderful woman? Like, why does I have, like, why do I have to be like a wonderful mom? Do you know what I mean? If that makes sense. I know the conversation was about having children, but I was always met with a question of why. Like, they always would want to know. And I think that like that was coming from a place of judgment in a sense. Like I said, nobody was ever mean to me about it. I never was met with that, but it was always like confusion. People would be like, "Why don't you want to have kids? What?" And that happened a lot. I think not with like Ashton. I feel like Ashton and I were on the same page a lot of the time, so we talked about, like, we still talk about children a lot and everything, but I started to like not talk about kids a lot with like other people and like how I felt about it because a lot of people did want children and they knew that that was going to be their future. They knew they wanted to be moms. And I didn't know how to explain other than I just don't want them. Um, that didn't seem like it was enough for people when they would ask why, if that makes sense, because I didn't know.
Yeah, so I remember um, we didn't hang out a ton in college, mostly because we were just at very different points. Like, I already had a kid. So we would hang out, like, if you would come visit Ashton, because we were roommates. So, like, we would hang out then. I think I came down to visit you guys, like, a few times, like a handful of times, if I had a weekend where I didn't have Everly. But for the most part, I don't, like, we didn't do a lot of hanging out or, like, kind of like soul level connecting, I don't think. Maybe every once in like our drunken stupor, but 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 I do remember once like having that conversation with you, and I don't know if at the time it came across the way that I emotionally felt about it, but I feel like I came in from like a different perspective. And I don't know, I think that like I do feel like we had like been drinking. Maybe not like we weren't like wasted, but I think that like we had been drinking when we had this conversation. So like I said, I don't know how you like grasped it, but I remember being we were at your apartment. I think like Jen was living with you. Michaela lived with you. I don't know if Sage lived with you or if it was no, she didn't. It was another person that like I didn't know. But she like we were having this conversation, I think while we were getting ready or something, and I remember like I was really curious as to why you didn't. Like I was aware of your medical issues and that sort of stuff. I don't think that I knew that you had like half a uterus, but I remember you having all the like cysts and always being in the hospital and having so much pain. And so I think in my brain, like I knew that that was part of your reasoning, but, and I knew that at one point you had mentioned that doctors told you it would be really hard for you to have kids. But I think when we had the conversation, I think that it was more about your career. I think that you had like made a comment about like you wanted to be like strong and independent and you wanted to be able to like enjoy traveling or like your career or whatever. And I remember you telling me that like that people didn't really understand that. And I was like, I do. Like, but not in a negative way. Like, because I had a kid so young, like, I was just like, I respected you for being able to say that. Like, for being able to be like, hey, this is a decision that I have come to grips with. And this is, you know, me owning that. And I think that I was like, wow, like, I wish more people could do that. Like, I wish it was just like, I wish society would accept it more when people would just openly be like, I don't want to have kids. Because not that I think I love my kids and I like, they're my best friends. And so, and I'm not saying that you're not at a point now where you may have changed your mind. I'm just saying that like, I hate that women get so much judgment for saying that because we see all the time all of these people that just have kids probably because they accidentally get pregnant or whatever. Sometimes they're like drug addicts or, you know, whatever the case may be. But like you see people who have horror stories of how like, I remember there was one specifically in like the town we grew up in where like these people, I think they were on drugs, pretty sure they were, but like they like killed their baby and like left her in the woods or something like, and that sort of stuff. I'm like, I wish people who like didn't want to have kids or I mean in some cases didn't need to have kids could just like be okay with that. And I don't know those people personally, so I have no idea what their situation was, but I just think that like I feel like a lot of times people have kids out of obligation or like they feel like, oh, my husband wants to have kids, so like I owe it to him, or my parents want grandkids, so I owe it to them. And I don't think that we do. And I don't think that women get enough, I don't want to say credit, but I don't think people understand enough what women go through in order to have a kid. I understand that like the husband like goes through some of it as well, and especially the financial aspect because, you know, sometimes, especially when the women are on maternity leave, like the man is, you know, most of the time still working during that time or whatever. But the emotional, physical, like all of the stuff that changes about your life when you carry a child, like people just don't understand how much that takes. Take like the financial, the $200,000 to $300,000 that it takes to raise a kid nowadays, take that out of the equation, and just like the emotional and physical side of making that decision to have a child, it requires a lot. And then obviously raising a kid for the next 18 years requires a lot. And so I think that being able to have the courage to say, I don't think I want kids. Like, and it, I know that people say like, oh, that's very selfish. And it is, but it's okay. Like, it's okay. It's okay to be like at a point in your life where you are selfish because you worked really hard to graduate high school and you worked really hard to get through college. And if you want to take 5-10 years to travel and enjoy the money that you work so hard for, then like I'm for it, you know? And so I think that when we had that conversation, like I came from it in like not a sense of regret because there's never been a day where I regretted having a kid, but there was a sense of not jealousy, but like there was a sense of like, man, it would be so nice sometimes to be able to, you know, like you and Ashton went and studied abroad in like Ireland, and I would have loved to do that. And even though I was in college, I would have never been able to do that because I had a kid, you know? And so there's just certain like things that you guys could enjoy that I couldn't. And like I said, I never regretted it, but I wish that it was just acceptable for people to just say like, hey, whether it's in this season of my life or whether it's for the rest of my life, like if I don't want to have kids, like that's okay. And like, if you, as my friend or my, family or whatever, like, if you want kids that bad in your life, then like, you have kids. Or like if your parents, like, because I mean, more often than not, like, grandparents, this is a whole nother topic, but grandparents push so hard. Like, I hear these conversations, I've heard them in my own life, I've heard them in, like, for my siblings, I've heard them from strangers on the street. Like, grandparents are notorious for, like, when are you guys having a baby? When are you guys gonna have another baby? Like, so I know people that as soon as a baby will pop out, they'll be like, okay, when are you having the next one? And I'm like, dude, they haven't even managed having this one yet. Like, they're not even home from the hospital yet. And so I think more often than not, like, what's frustrating to me about that whole situation is just that grandparents are so quick to be like, oh, when are you having a baby? When are you having another baby? More babies, babies, babies. But then it's like, you guys are not the ones that have to, like, raise them day in and day out and financially. And I'm not saying that they don't help, because obviously, like, our kids' grandparents love to get them. And like right now, Everly's on a trip to Mississippi with her grandma. And like, so they love to help, but it's still like, we are still the ones that have to make that decision, like, and raise them financially, and then potentially one day send them all to college, and then, deal with the emotions of having them. Like, every year as she gets closer to like puberty, like, I literally cannot imagine what I'm going to be in for when she's a teenager. And so, like, it's already so hard some days. Like, she comes home so emotional or whatever, and I'm like, then like, she's being emotional, and then Declan's being, he's in that terrible 3 stage. So like, sometimes I feel like they tag team and they're just like, oh, let's both just be terrorists today. And then like, I'm like, I couldn't imagine having a newborn baby on top of that. Like, so it's frustrating. Like, I can imagine. I'm like, I have kids, but even when you have kids, it sometimes feels like it's not enough. So I couldn't imagine, like, being in a point where I'm like, I'm never going to have kids, and like, the kind of emotions that, or like judgment that you get from other people when you say that. So
Yeah, especially from family. But um, yeah, it was just kind of weird. And I think that, like, I feel like you were one of the only people at that point in time that I would talk with that I felt like a understanding from. You know what I mean? Which was nice. But a lot of the times it was like, whoa, why? Like, what's going on? And I think it was beautiful to see, because a lot of like my high school friends got pregnant. Not a lot, but a few of them got pregnant young and had babies. And I think, well, only two, I guess. Not really. Yeah, only two.
who was the other one?
Haley.
Oh, yeah, yeah. I forget every single time. I forget because we didn't we didn't actually find out until after we graduated. So for me, like, I felt like in our friend group, I felt really alone. And I think that her and I talked about this like way, like, after we'd had our kids. And it was nice that we both had kids at the same, kind of like the same time, because I think they're a month apart. So we had kids at like the same time. And so when they were infants, like, it was nice having somebody to connect to. But I feel like in high school, it was just me. And I think there had been like a couple random people. I mean, there's only one that I can think of off the top of my head. But like, there was some people who had gotten pregnant either, junior year or like, even senior year. But most of the time they drop out. And I didn't want to be that person. Like, I was like you in the sense of like, I wanted to go to college, and my mom had me and my brother both very young, and I didn't want to fit this stereotype of like, oh, if you get pregnant in college, then like your life is over. So I was very determined to graduate high school with honors, which I did, and go to college and graduate college, which I didn't do, but not because I had a kid. I went to college for 4 years. The reason that I decided not to graduate is because depression. And yeah, and then just it started with taking time off, and just I didn't go back. And I think that for me personally, like, I've contemplated and re-registered for school so many times that, like, for me, every single time, it just still doesn't feel like the right decision. So that's a whole yeah, it has nothing to do with having a kid though. So Yeah, I feel that, but I did feel very like alone in those like last few months of high school, just like being the only one because there was so much judgment and so much everything that came into like, oh, you're pregnant and you're in high school, like, um, so I forget that it wasn't just me.
But yeah, I think seeing you guys, and like, not that it was bad at all, you know, but like, I think seeing specifically you, because I think I spent the most time with you and Everly, um, seeing that and seeing like kind of how stressed you felt and just, it just felt overwhelming for you. I remember just feeling like really, really like, no, I didn't, it wasn't pity. It was like, I'm trying to describe the feeling. It was like, I just really wanted to help as much as I could, like while I was there almost, I guess. I don't know. And you were a wonderful mom, like even being young and even when Everly was young, I just remember feeling really bad and like being in a sense of like what I was doing with our friends versus like what you had to do, you know? I don't know. I think just like watching you, and not, like I said, not in a way of pity at all, but it was, I don't know how to describe the word. I don't know if there's a word for it. Like I said, it wasn't like I felt bad or like felt like I wasn't pitying you. It was more of just like, I don't know how to describe it. I don't know.
I mean, I guess I can understand. Like, I don't want to say guilt is the word, but I can understand that sometimes. Like, sometimes somebody, like, if I'm enjoying a season of life, like, let's say, like, like if, you know, when Declan was born, for instance, I don't know anybody personally, but like, just trying to give you an example. Like, if Declan was born and I was living and having fun and enjoying this newborn stage, and then somebody in my friend group was having a very hard time conceiving and going through this emotional turmoil of dealing with something heavy, then I can feel where like I don't want to say guilty, but like I think that's the only word I can think of is like where I would feel a little bit of guilt and sadness for like a not being able to understand what they're going through, but also like there is a sense of guilt, and I don't think that there should be. I don't think that there should be guilt, like because I should be able to enjoy the season of life that I'm in, but in this at the same time, like you don't want to take away from like the hardship that somebody else is going through. So I can understand that. Like it's not that you felt bad for me. It's just that like you had like I don't want to say you had no cares because like you were kind of paying your own way through college, and I know that you had a lot of stuff you were struggling with and you had like multiple jobs, and so you were dealing with your own stuff, but like you were able to go out, and like even when you would come visit Ashton, like you would come visit and then you and Ashton would go do stuff and I would have to stay home. So I can see where like at some point you might be like, I can't imagine how that is for her.
That's a good way to describe it. Yeah. Yeah. I think it was more of like coming from just like an empathetic standpoint and because I cared about you, you know, it was like, this is one of my friends. And, you know, yeah, like putting myself in your shoes is the best way to describe it, I guess. And then seeing that, I think really, solidified for me in that moment or in that season that I don't think that I wanted to put myself through it. Yeah, I think that was also something too. But okay, so speaking of you being pregnant, you got pregnant at a really, really young age. And I wanted to know if you could talk a little bit about like what the experience like was for you. I know you touched on it a little bit, but I'm really curious to know like the nitty gritty. Like what did you receive judgment? Like what did people say? Or, you know, how did your parents react? And I think a big one that I always wonder too is like, because you were so young, did you consider like any alternative options when you found out?
Okay. So, this is a lot to unpack. So I I'm very open with talking about like my past and what happened and how things came about. But I also hate talking about it, not because it like not because of how it affects me, because it's been almost a decade, and I think that I'm at a place where like I've dealt with it. I've been through therapy. I've been through all this stuff, but I hate talking about it because I feel like I hate the way people receive it. And I don't know, like literally you and I were just talking about, you know, something sad for you. And so in that moment, I was kind of like, that really sucks. And at the same time, I'm trying to be mindful of like how I'm reacting, because I hate when I tell people about like my story and then people like almost react with pity. So that's more why I hate talking about it than I do the actual conversation itself. So I got pregnant with Everly as a result of sexual assault. So there was no like high school romance that like led into me getting pregnant. So starting with your last question of whether or not I considered alternative, routes, I did. Obviously, abortion was the first one. Because of the situation and how it happened more than my age. I don't think that my age played a huge part in me thinking that. Okay, let me back up. I found out because I remember at one point, like, Ashton had like a guy that she was talking to, and she wanted him to come over to my house. And I was like, the only way he's coming over is if he brings me pickles. Like, I need some pickles. And I was craving pickles so bad. And at the time, my period was very, like, hit or miss anyway because of the birth control that I was on. I think I was taking, like, the birth control shot. And so, like, some months I would have a period and some months I wouldn't. So when I missed my period, I wasn't thinking, like, oh, I'm pregnant automatically. Like, I just was like, okay, it'll come in a couple of weeks or something. Like, so then I started craving pickles. And I knew, like, something was wrong with me. And so he came, he brought my pickles, and I ate the whole jar in like one sitting. Like, and it wasn't like a little jar. It was like a pretty decent sized jar. And so after that, I was like, holy shit. Like something's wrong, and I think I know what it is. So I took a pregnancy test at Ashton's house. And I remember at first the second line was very, very faint. And I think we probably spent like a total of an hour like staring so close at something that I had peed all over. So I was like, I think there's a faint line. And she was like, no, there's not. She was in such denial. She was like, there is no faint line. And I was like, Ashton, I think there is. And so I remember she had talked to her mom about it. And I love Trina. And I remember Trina was like, okay. She's like, we're going to get one where there's no questions. And she bought me like one of those digital ones. And I thought they were so cool at the time. And so I peed on that one. And 110% said pregnant. And so I was like, okay, well, there's no questioning this one. And so anyway, so I knew that I had to tell my mom because I was like, I'm not going to be able to hide it. And I, at the time, thought that I wanted to have an abortion. So I was like, I can't do that on my own. So I told my mom, but I was terrified because like growing up, my mom always was like, if you get pregnant, like I will murder you. Like, and it was like serious threats. Like, and so I was terrified. And I worked at McDonald's at the time. And I remember I was like closing one night. Like I always worked until like 1 or 2 a.m. like, and we would always close. And so I was closing, and I remember before I went to work, I had asked her like, hey, can I spend the night at Ashton's tonight? And she was like, yeah, that's fine, blah, blah. Like I think she had plans or something. And so I already had plans to not go home. And I think I had lied to her potentially about like what time I got off. I think I switched shifts with somebody, and I think I decided to like get off earlier. And so I remember that I texted her and told her that I was pregnant. And then I turned my phone off and I left it in the break room.
Brittany.
I know. I didn't go back there and check it for hours. And I was so scared. I remember I waited until I went on break because I knew that I was going to cry. And so I didn't go back and check it for hours. And so I went back to the break room, got my phone, went out to my car and like checked it. And I was literally expecting my mom to like show up at my job and like pull me out by my hair and like beat me in the parking lot for real. But luckily, like I turned on my phone and I had like so many texts from my mom about like, like, I wish you felt comfortable enough to talk to me. Like, and then once she realized I wasn't responding, then it was more like, I love you so much. Like, we can get through this, blah, blah. Like, so it was more positive, but I was terrified. So yeah, I definitely told my mom via text message. And so, I had planned it to where like, I was like, I'm not going to go home tonight in case she tries to murder me. So like, anyways, so then I had made an appointment, for an abortion. And, like obviously before this I had gone home and like had the whole conversation with my mom about like what happened and this and that. And so, I made the appointment, and I actually was in a relationship at the time, that all of this happened. And I remember after the assault, like, I had told my boyfriend about it. He was in college. I was a senior in high school. And so when he had come home, like, I told him about it. And I remember it was really hard for him and I to work through that in and of itself, because then obviously, like, being touched for a little while, like, afterwards, it was very hard for us to work through it. And then, like 2 months later, like, finding out I was pregnant, like, I was at kind of like a standstill because, like, him and I were being, sexually active. And so I was like, I don't know if this is your kid or if it's a result of that. And so my emotions were just very conflicted, and he wanted me to get an abortion either way. And so, because he didn't want to take a chance on it being somebody else's kid. And so with him wanting that, and with me wanting that, and with my mom, being supportive and being like, whatever you decide. She wouldn't really tell me one way or the other how she felt. She was just like, whatever you want to do. And so I made the appointment, and I remember, it was in like February, because this happened the very end of December, like when I got pregnant. So by February is kind of like when I found out and whatnot. And so I made the appointment, and I honestly still to this day feel like nothing but God created the entire snowstorm that, like, snowed us in and everything shut down, and, like, so I had to reschedule it. And so I was really emotional and upset. And I remember when I made the initial appointment, like, they told me, they were like, you're going to have to come in, we're going to have to do an ultrasound, we're going to have to do all this. And so I was very, like, conflicted, because I always, like, just told myself, like, I'm never going to have to see or know. I mean, obviously I knew I was pregnant, but, like, it didn't feel real. And so I think that, I was conflicted, because I was like, now I have to go, like, hear a heartbeat and, like, see a baby and whatever before they'll actually do the procedure. And so I was having all these mixed emotions. Then, God created a snowstorm. I got snowed in. I couldn't go. And so anyways, I rescheduled it. And then we were on our way to my next appointment. I don't remember who was with me. I don't remember if it was Ashton, or I honestly don't remember who was with me, but I remember that we stopped by Kohl's. I don't know if my mom had to, like, return something, or we were just waiting until closer to my appointment, but we were, like, on the way, I'm pretty sure. And we stopped at Kohl's, and I remember I was, like, walking around with my friend. I want to say it had to have been Ashton at the time, because she was, like, the only person I was really hanging out with, like, regularly. But it caused a huge rift in our friendship too. I think when I made the decision to have an abortion, because, being Christians, like, she didn't agree with it. And but I remember we were at Kohl's, and I was walking around looking for my mom, and I walked past the section of baby clothes, and I saw this little outfit and, like, how tiny it was. And I just, like, knew in that moment, I was like, I can't do this. And I walked to wherever my mom was in the store, and I was just like, I can't do it. And so we went home, and we never talked about it again, really. So then I went down the path of considering adoption, obviously. Like, and then me and my boyfriend ended up breaking up, because he was also upset that I didn't want to have an abortion. Even though, like, to this day, I'm still like, well, what if it would have been your kid? But whatever. So we were just like, we broke up, and then I was dealing with, like, an emotional breakup, and then trying to figure out whether or not I wanted to, like, go through with adoption. And everybody's like, well, you don't have to decide until, like, the baby's here or whatever. And I was like, okay, but I need to decide for myself. And so I thought I was going to go down that route for, like, a hot minute. I think it was, like, maybe a month or two. And then it was, like, obviously I had to start going to the doctor and getting ultrasounds and taking prenatal vitamins and doing all the things to make this baby healthy. And as the baby started to grow, and as, as a woman, as my body made that, like, maternal connection, I just, at some point, I don't remember exactly how far along I was, but at some point I made the decision, like, this is my baby. I can't give it up. Like, regardless of how, like, whose baby it is, and regardless of how, like, how this came about, potentially, like, I was just like, it's my baby either way, and I can't do that. And so, at some point, I mean, it had to have been, like, 4 months or so, because I remember at 5 months, we graduated. And I remember, like, like that like last 2 months of school, kind of everybody started to find out because we went to school with a bunch of people who knew like the group of people that it involved really. And so
Alcovey Susan.
there was Alcovey Susan. Anyways, so Alcovey Susan was an anonymous person who I still don't know who it was, but it was an anonymous person who was going around messaging me and all my friends and the, person who had done it, and like just like I think even maybe our friends' parents at some point. And so they were just going around like talking about me and the potential dad and like the situation, and it was all just a huge mess. And the person, the guy was older than us, so didn't go to school with us, but a lot of people knew them and knew like it was a mess. And so I had a lot of people like leaving me messages all the time, like in my locker or whatever, like just people and like people talking about me like in class. I remember specifically like there was a group of guys that we had hung out with like over the whole 4 years that we were in high school. It was like a group of guys, and they were like the goofball, like class clown, popular guys kind of. And I remember specifically one time, like I came into class to sit down, like where we always sat, and like they wouldn't let me sit with them. And yeah, and I remember like at one point, like after days of just like people like saying mean stuff or leaving me mean notes or calling me a whore or whatever the case may be, like after just like days or weeks of that, like I remember when I wasn't allowed to like sit with them, I kind of just like flipped my shit. And I remember being in class, like I don't remember whose class we were in, but I know it caught the teacher off guard because like I ended up sitting at the table behind them or beside them. And I remember at one point, like they were just like whispering, and I think one of them maybe had like made a comment over in my direction. And I remember like I looked at them and I was like, pregnancy is not fucking contagious. And I think at that point, like that's when everybody was like, what? She's pregnant? Like the people that didn't, like weren't kind of in our circle. And so then I remember specifically, I think the last couple months of high school were just like super hard because it just had people who didn't know what really happened, and I wasn't at a point where I wanted to talk about what had actually happened. And so I just got a lot of stuff about like being a slut and being, like all kinds of stuff. And so I got a lot of negativity. But I remember specifically there was a girl, I'm not gonna like name drop, but there was a girl that I wasn't really good friends with because the guy that I was dating at the time, it was his ex. So we weren't very good friends. But we were in the same grade and we knew each other. We had a lot of classes together. And I remember specifically, like, I think maybe she stuck it in my yearbook or maybe in my locker. I don't remember, or maybe on my car. But at one point I came across a note that she had written me. It was basically just like, I'm so sorry that like everybody is treating you so bad. I think I still have the note, to be honest. I think it's in my, I have like a little memory box and I think it's in there. But, she was like, I'm so sorry for like everything that you've gone through and how everybody's treating you. And I think that you're so strong for making this decision. And I'm so proud of you and like all this stuff. And it literally was just like, if somebody who kind of hated me could be this nice to me, like, I don't give a shit what anybody else says, really. And like, I knew that like, obviously my friends, like you guys were very supportive. My parents were supportive. And so, yeah. So anyways, that's a little bit about my background and Everly. My pregnancy with her was very hard, but in a different way. It was hard because of all the judgment. It was hard because of what I had gone through. But I think that the actual, like, something shifted in my brain at some point where I was like, I have to be a good mom. Like, I have to put myself aside. I have to figure out how to be a mom. And I have to figure out how to do it while not letting my entire life be altered, my future, my career, because I want to and need to be able to provide for her. So I think that I shoved down so much of the emotion that came with like what happened to me and how all of that, like how it affected me and all this. And like it would come up every once in a while, like obviously with, the whole Alcovey Susan thing, or like people, like we just had a lot of mutual friends, so people would ask about them, or like then he ended up having more kids and people would be like, oh, do you know he's having, and I'm like, it was a lot to like deal with, but also at the same time I'm like just trying to shove it down because I just didn't feel like I had the emotional, like I said, I was working 16 hours, I was going to school during the day, I was trying to stay up and study at night, I was working at night. Ashton was having to help me. Ashton and my grandma were having to help me so much with Everly, like, and I felt like guilty all the time because I felt like I didn't have enough time to give her anyway. And during the time that I did have to give her, like, I was just trying to be as present as possible. So I didn't allow myself any mental space or any mental time to think about what had happened or deal. Like, I was like, I can't allow myself to break. Like, I just have to be strong. So I never dealt with any of that. And so my second pregnancy, okay, well, before that, I went through, I think Everly was like 3 when I finally, like, I had like a depressive break. Like, my mind just broke in half. And that's when I ended up getting diagnosed with depression and all that stuff. But before that, I didn't even know. Like, I was functioning well enough, I guess. But after years and years of just shoving down, obviously, like, all my childhood traumas and then, you know, the trauma of what happened to me and all of that, and then just working and not sleeping and probably not eating well because I was on a, you know, single mom salary. Like, so after all of that, like, and then trying to date, I think Colby and I had been together for about like a year at this point, and I literally mentally broke. And there was like a week where I just like didn't even see my kid. Like, I just had Colby's mom like picking her up every day or Colby picking her up every day, and they would just be like, hey, and I would lie and I would be like, oh, I have to work or I have class or whatever. But really, I was just laying in my bed. I was skipping class. I was calling out of work. I was laying in my bed just staring at the empty wall. And I literally didn't care about anything. Like, nothing. Like, I didn't care about eating. I didn't care about anything. And so that, like, at that point, like, one day it like flipped. Like, Colby, I finally like told Colby, kind of like, you know, I can't get out of the bed. I can't take a shower. And so like he came and, you know, kind of helps me and then made me make a doctor's appointment. And initially they put me on a grocery list of medicine. And yeah, I became like a zombie. I hated it. And so I ended up I stopped taking my medication after a while and then just tried to function with my depression. And I did okay for a while. And then I think the following year, Colby and I got married. Moving to Florida really helped. I mean, it helped me in so many ways. It helped me because the distance, like, I had a lot of fear and anxiety about that person taking Everly away from me or trying to get rights because, you know, I was just, there was a whole lot of just like anxiety and stuff that came with those first few years. And so moving to a whole nother state, it gave me that distance that I needed to kind of like breathe. And so when we were in Florida, I just kind of thrived. Like, I was happy. I was living by the beach. I was, you know, I didn't worry about running into them every 5 minutes. So I just mentally started thriving. Well, then we moved back to Georgia and some of that anxiety came back. But Colby and I got married, and then I was like, okay, once we get married, then like maybe he can adopt Everly. And we started looking into it. And then, like, I don't remember why we didn't end up pulling the trigger, but then after we had been married, I think Everly was like 5 probably by the time I got pregnant with Declan. And I thought my second pregnancy was going to be magical. Like, after the way things happened with Everly, like, I was very depressed. Like, when I would sit down and think about the fact that I didn't have like this bubbly pregnancy announcement or gender reveal or whatever, you know, like, I had a baby shower, but it was, you know, just kind of like you guys. And then like, and I don't even, like, I don't know who planned it. Maybe, I don't remember. Anyways, but I didn't have like a bunch of love and excitement. And so I thought that like once I got married and had another kid, I was like, oh, everybody will be so happy. I will be so happy. My husband will be so happy. My family will be so happy. Like, Everly will be happy, and Everly was happy. She was probably like the only one. I was happy when I found out I was pregnant, for sure. Colby was not so happy. And it wasn't because he didn't want a kid. It was just like, he had talked about trying, and we had kind of like, I had come off of birth control, and we were in this process of like trying, but not trying too hard. And we just, I don't, like, we were kind of like, we had been trying for a few months, and then we kind of went through this point where like we took like a little bit of a financial dip, or like, I don't remember if he changed jobs or what, but like there was something to do with like money. Like he was just really stressed out about money. And then I remember I found out like, I want to say like the week before Father's Day. And then so like for Father's Day, I had given him like a little note or something that was like, you're going to have like one more thing to be thankful for like this Father's Day or something like that. And I just remember like the pure look of like shock, because I don't think he wanted it to come off as like he was unhappy, but like I remember later when we had a conversation about it, like he was just so like a whole baby, like, because this was his first like biological child. And so he was very like, what do I do with a newborn baby? And like, how do I financially, because I think like this whole $200,000 to $300,000 is like what went through his brain. Not that I'm saying he was aware of how much, but just in general, like a whole nother person to feed and take care of and provide for. Like he was just very overwhelmed with that emotion. And so later, like obviously we kind of went through this process of like being a little excited, and then we were really excited when we told Everly, and we were really excited when we told our family. But that didn't last very long. My second pregnancy. Like I said, once I went off this first grocery list full of depression meds, like I'd never ended up getting back on anything because I felt like I was doing okay. But obviously, as we all know, your emotions get heightened when you're pregnant. And so my depression got severely heightened when I was pregnant with Declan. Obviously, like, you know, in the beginning, I was like crying all the time. I was throwing up all the time. I was just emotional in general. But then like it was really my second and third trimester when things were supposed to get better and they didn't, that it took the biggest toll on me. And I was upset with myself for not enjoying my pregnancy. And I don't want to say upset with Declan, obviously, because he didn't have anything to do with it. He was just growing. And so, but Colby was having a really hard time understanding. I feel like he was still really just trying to grasp the concept of me having depression to begin with, like, and how to deal with that. And then obviously it was heightened when I was pregnant. And so he was trying to literally just give me and serve me in any way he could. Like he was trying to give me everything I needed. Whether that was like getting me ice cream at 2 a.m. or like, you know, whatever, all the weird pregnancy things, like buying me this ginormous pregnancy pillow that took up most of our bed and whatever. Like I was just never comfortable, and I was never happy, and I was still having to work. And I was in a job where I was working in like a chemical manufacturing company. So like it was kind of dangerous, and I was being taken advantage of as far as like, you know, my workload. And Colby worked at the same place. And so Colby would see it all the time, and he was angry about it, and I was angry about it. And I don't know, it was just like this whole thing. And then my depression got to a point where it was like really bad. And I was just like, I remember, I absolutely hate admitting this, but I remember at one point, like, I just didn't want to live anymore. Like, I didn't want to, like, and literally being pregnant was the only thing that kept me going. Like, and it's not even because I wanted to. The amount of guilt that I felt, about thinking about suicide. And I was like, I don't want to take that out on this baby who like is not at fault, really. So I remember so many times thinking like, after I have the baby, then I will do it. And that was very hard. And then it was even harder because then when I had Declan, I don't want to say that all of that went away, but like it became real to me that I had another kid, because during my pregnancy, like I was just so depressed. Like I don't feel like I really processed a lot. The fact that I was actually having a person, like another person with a personality, kind of, I guess. And so after I had Declan, like, I remember being in the hospital, and even, I don't know, maybe it didn't hit me until I got home, but I remember at one point, like, I was just looking at him, and I was just so overwhelmed with emotion and guilt. Like, the guilt that I felt after I had him forever even thinking about that sort of stuff, like, it consumed me. And so then I think it kind of made me a little, I don't want to say more depressed, because I feel like once my, like, hormones started to balance out, like, it kind of eased a little bit. But, like, I feel like those first few months with Declan, I clung to him. Like, I clung to him because, like, I didn't want anybody to hold him. I didn't want anybody to do anything. Like, even Colby. I didn't even like letting Colby hold him, honestly. Like, I feel like I was trying to make up for how awful I had been mentally, because, like, I don't know scientifically. I mean, I know that babies can kind of feel how you feel when you're pregnant, but, like, I felt so guilty that, like, I felt like I had to make it up to him, if that makes sense. So, like, when he was first born, like, I was on such an emotional roller coaster, and you always are after you have a kid, because just your hormones are just all over the place, and you're sleep deprived and everything. But yeah, that my second pregnancy was not nearly as joyful or beautiful as I thought it was going to be. It was probably more depressing than my first pregnancy, but in a completely different way. And I think it was just more depressing because I had so many expectations as to what it should be. And those expectations were brought on by everybody else's Instagram reel life, of posting their beautiful pregnancy announcements and their, happy gender reveals and, like, all of the things. So, I think that me seeing everybody else's, like, Instagram reel life over the last few years since between having Everly and getting pregnant with Declan, I think I expected, now that I was married and having a baby, for it to be this beautiful, magical, nothing's going to be wrong kind of thing. And so then obviously after I had Declan and I got done breastfeeding, it only lasted for a few months. So then after that, the first thing that I did once I stopped breastfeeding was go get on depression medicine, and I've been on it ever since. So that was a big game changer for me.
And I'm glad he kept you here.
Me too. Now I'm 100% glad that I didn't make any very brash, dumb decisions during that time. But I still, even now, like, every time I talk about it, I still feel, like, riddled with guilt. And I don't know if that'll ever go away. It's the same way with, like, Everly. Anytime, like, I admit to anybody that I ever considered having an abortion, like, I don't think anybody blames me. Like, when people know, like, the full story and, like, how that whole thing came about, like, everybody's like, I can't believe you didn't. But I still, like, as much as I love her now, I don't know if I'll ever get over the guilt of, like, even those first, like, couple weeks having considered it. So
Hindsight's 2020, though. I think, like, if you would have, I don't know. I guess all I have to say to that is hindsight's 2020. Because you love her so much, I can understand where that guilt would come from. I get that.
okay, guys, we are going to stop part 1 here. Make sure and join us next week for part 2, where we continue our discussion on kids and having kids and whether we're going to have more kids. Just kind of our histories. We look forward to seeing you next week.
Yeah, be sure to join us for part 2.